Welcome to NCraft, a 3D voxel game made completely by me with C++ and OpenGl. It has features such as block breaking and placing, a procedurally generated world, a variety of blocks, lighting, gravity, and more. The goal behind this project was to not use any third-party library or game engine, and to instead make everything completely by myself. So this way I can better understand how other game engines work. This video has brief clips of the different stages of development, starting from all the way of just a simple rectangle to the complete game. I hope you enjoy seeing my progress. Firstly, I started off by following a simple OpenGl tutorial to get a nice rotating square. And I also added a wireframe mode, which will become really interesting later on down the line. Next, I worked on some simple perspective projection, then some rotation, and finally a fully rendered cube. At this point, I was completely done with the OpenGl tutorial, and it was time to start working on NCraft. Next, things started getting really exciting, because we finally got movement, and multiple cubes. Now it was time to start working on chunks. Chunks are really important in these voxel type games. At first, there was a little bit of difficulties, but soon I figured it out, and we got one full chunk rendering. But I was not done yet, because all the blocks in the center were also being rendered, which was completely unnecessary. To fix this, first I added a way to only render the faces I want. Then I told each face to only render if there is an air block and we can see it. At first, there were some slight issues, but soon it all started working, and it was truly amazing to see this completed chunk all working and to see how clean the inside could be. Here we're going inside the chunk. However, in the completed game, players will be at the top, so they won't even notice that all the blocks in the middle aren't rendering, and this is why this is such a great optimization. Next, I added multiple chunks and a simple chunk loading system that makes sure to not unnecessarily render the chunk edges. Here in wireframe mode, on the left image, there is a lot of unnecessary edges being rendered. On the right is after I fixed it. This was actually a difficult task, because it required each chunk to keep track of all of the other neighbor chunks in order to do the optimization. After all that, I decided to add some simple block breaking just to test the chunk mesh generation system. Now I was getting really tired of constantly seeing the crate texture, so I decided to work on my own grass texture. At first, there were some difficulties implementing it, but soon I figured it out, and it started looking great. I refined the texture a bit more, and now it works really well with the block breaking system I implemented earlier. Next, I started on adding some simple world generation. First, I implemented procidurally. However, later on, I switched over to SimplexNoise as I found that turned out to be more efficient. Now I started to do more work on what ended up being the hardest part of the entire project, and that was the chunk loading system. As you can see, now I've created the chunk loading in a way that when it follows the player around, as you move around the world, the chunks generate near you. Next was the chunk unloading system. As the player starts to get far away from some chunks, those chunks that are really far away needed to get unloaded, and that is the system that's implemented here. Now it was time to finally add some proper block placing and breaking. Before, you couldn't just click on a block to break it, but now I added some raycasting to allow you to do that. Block placing was very similar to block breaking, but just in reverse. Now I added a simple lighting system. I think this massively improved the aesthetic of the game, as it was a lot easier to distinguish between the different blocks now. Now I started working on some simple UI, first a triangle, and then I made a crosshair, and I implemented that crosshair into the game. Next, I started working on some new block types. So I made a sand block type and a new stone block type. And then I added some new biomes. So this is the desert biome. But now I needed to add a way to select between the different block types. So I started working on a hotbar. And now you can select the different blocks and pick the one you want to place down. The next blocks I started to add into the game were some more wooden blocks. So firstly some logs and then later on planks. Next I added leaves into the game. Now some interesting structures could be built with these leaves and logs, mainly trees. The first step to tree generation is tree trunks, so that's what I added next. Next I added some simple leaves, mostly using a random generation algorithm. However, I think this system could definitely be improved to be more natural looking. Next, I added some simple gravity, so the player just falls down. And from that, I also built a simple collision detection system, so you don't go into blocks anymore. And this is where NCraft is right now. There is still a lot of improvements that could be made, and I am still working on this project. I'm really glad I did start this project, because I've learned a lot more about the inner workings of a game engine, and I've especially learned about areas such as rendering, which I was pretty oblivious to before. I really hope you found seeing my incremental progress and some of the many challenges I ran into along the way interesting. All of the code of NCraft is on my GitHub and is linked in the description of this video, so feel free to take a look. I plan to make many more videos like this as I continue improving NCraft. Thank you for now, and bye.